Since investing in real estate, I have never paid a penny in state and federal income tax.
Welcome to the Freedom Point Real Estate Podcast, where we talk about creating more time freedom through passive real estate investing. Passive investing in real estate challenges conventional investment wisdom. We are passionate about learning and sharing resources with others who are ready to transform their investing mindset. Quick disclaimer as always, I am not a CPA, I am not an attorney or a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, not telling you or anyone else what to do. The views and opinions expressed in these podcasts are provided for education and informational purposes only and are not necessarily the views of my employer. I'm glad you're here. Now let's dig in. All right, welcome back, Freedom Point Podcast listeners. Thank you again for jumping into another episode of the Freedom Point. Very thankful that you're here with us again today. And I've got another amazing guest, Dr. Allen. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm so glad to be with you on Freedom Point Podcast. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to having the conversation with you. Dr. Allen is a Ph.D. in organizational systems psychology and a seasoned investor who empowers professionals, entrepreneurs, and retirees to achieve their financial well-being while passionately engaging in their true calling. Allen, having rebuilt his financial life stronger after significant losses incurred during the 2008 global financial crisis, Dr. Allen now inspires others to create their own secure and resilient financial treasure chest while making a meaningful impact. Dr. Allen, I know you've had a lot of experience in the real estate space and psychology space and empowering professionals to become a better version of themselves. There's really a lot going on there. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to kind of let us know a little bit more about, Dr. Allen and, your journey, what you're focused on today, et cetera.
Well, thanks for asking that, Jeremy. I'm going to keep it as brief as I can here. So I had a very slow start in life. It was really, I did not find my footing in life until I was really about 40 years old. And before that, I was living a pretty lackluster, directionless life. And I was 38 years old, and for the first time in my life, I went into to psychotherapy, and it was like a light switch. I just went from a lackluster existence to a very, very focused, passionate life with a lot of meaning and fulfillment. So that's when I really went into psychology. And early on in my career, just getting this back to the finances, I was just doing what financial advisors told me to do, which was just putting my retirement savings into stocks and bonds. Well, each and every quarter when I got the statements, it was like, are you kidding me? 4 and 5% interest. I'm not keeping up with inflation. So I looked into real estate and not really getting a whole lot of education in there. I realized the potential there. And so I started investing in single family homes and was holding them for rentals. And over a 5, 6, 7 year period, the appreciation of that just blew my mind. And I had more wealth than I ever conceived of having. And that was great and wonderful. And then 2008 hit, and I, not knowing what I was doing in real estate, I lost really essentially all of my investments. At the same time, I lost the job that I had loved and which had brought tremendous fulfillment. So that was some really dark times and depressing times. And so I went back to the drawing board and started educating myself in terms of real estate investing and what went wrong and how can I prevent this in the future. And essentially what went wrong, there were three things. I was way over leveraged, and leverage is great if you're using it wisely. And I had no reserves was the second thing. And the third thing has slipped my mind. I don't know what that was. But anyway, I learned 3 lessons from that, and I'll come back to that when it comes back to me. Anyway, looking at that, the other thing is scalability. The single family homes just don't really have any scalability to them. So I started looking into commercial real estate, um, joined some meetups, joined some um, uh, groups, sponsoring groups, and started networking and realized uh, that there's a whole lot of potential in commercial real estate. So after joining a mastermind and putting some money into that, I'm going to go full scale into multifamily. And I started looking around, started developing some relationships with realtors, and actually put out a number of LOIs. And after going through that whole entire process, I realized this is just, again, once again, like the single family was, it's essentially a second job, and that's not what I'm looking for. So I started looking into how I could really scale this without reinventing the wheel. And I'm going, there's hundreds of syndicators out there with tons more experience than I have, and the smart thing to do is to partner with them on the capital raising side of the equation. And so I've been doing that, and it has been wonderful meeting lots of wonderful people. And it is a way that I have learned to scale my wealth to get back from everything that I had lost plus. And then this past summer, I started my coaching business because I realized that there's a lot of people in my same situation, mid level professionals and beyond, who are doing exactly what I was doing. They have everything they have in the stock market. And they're told that's diversification because it's in all kinds of different index funds, and they call that diversification. That's not, from my perspective, diversification, and it's not going to help them during a recession period. And so the coaching program takes these people who've been told that they are in the most secure investments to really helping them to really get into stable and secure tangible assets that have a track record of being resilient through recession periods. And beyond that, it helps them hedge against inflation. It also gives them tax liability reduction, which without that, I don't know how you're going to really develop wealth. So it's a wonderful way to do it. And then through my coaching program, not only have I been able to help myself, but I can help others find their way out of the mistakes that I had made.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Dr. Allen. And it's interesting. Your background is not exactly the same as mine, but maybe a little bit similar. I certainly am not a psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been labeled the mindset coach on several hockey teams that I've coached in the youth sports arena. So many of my players call me the psychology coach or the mindset coach. So I appreciate that. I also had some experiences during the global financial crisis. The good news is for me is I got started on the back end investing in single family homes versus on the front end. So I was largely the benefactor of buying a lot of those homes at a very reduced, valuation, coming out of that time period versus on your side, it sounded like those acquisitions took place, ahead, of the GFC. Yeah, that's right. But also love your perspective on how you really learn by doing, and then you realize the power of networking with others that were in this space to get you to where you ultimately are today. Would love for you to really elaborate, if you don't mind, on what makes passive commercial real estate investing such a powerful and resilient wealth building tool. I know you kind of elaborated a little bit on what some of those benefits are, but would love for you to maybe kind of highlight, why commercial real estate investing is really different, to traditional investing that maybe our financial advisors, would tell us to get involved with, which is primarily, correlated and directly tied to Wall Street.
Right. Well, the people that I work with, they are professionals and entrepreneurs, and they are in the midst of building careers that they are passionate about, and they have a huge desire to make an impact on the world and for the world through their professions. And so they first of all need a passive investment, and that's why Wall Street is one thing that appeals to them. But they don't realize that there are other avenues of passive investing. In fact, it's no more difficult to invest in a private placement than it is to invest in Wall Street if you have the the connections and the networks in place to do that. So that's the first thing that is important for them is that it is passive. And then there are actually five elements of investing in private placements. And you probably heard this. It's the ideal investment because there is income, depreciation, appreciation, equity, and leverage. You have all five of those elements in one investment. I don't know of any other investment that offers all of those. But through our private placements, we have income that is distributed on sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly, but regular distributions. And then on top of that, we have the depreciation, which is where the tax liabilities come into. And just for an example, in my case, as a professor, I have, a halfway decent salary, and so I'm a W-2 employee. But since investing in real estate, I have never paid a penny in state and federal income tax, and it's because of the depreciation benefits of real estate investing. And then, of course, appreciation is that there's natural appreciation, which over the last 100 years, real estate has on average appreciated 4% uh, just uh, just naturally without anything being done to it. And then there is forced appreciation, which when we purchase value add properties, we're forcing appreciation. And that's where the real big payoffs come from, is through that forced appreciation. And then the equity, then of course, equity is growing through appreciation, but it's also growing through paying down of the liabilities. So it is a constantly growing factor. And then, of course, leverage is what makes the value in real estate that you just can't get from any other aspect there. And leverage, we're leveraging over leveraging will kill you, particularly when a recession hits. But uh, the syndicators that we invest in, they have equity of probably 25 to 30%. And what I always look for in that is, can they sustain a 25% vacancy and still make the loan payments? If they can do that, then that's a pretty solid investment, and uh, it's going to sustain itself. It's going to be resilient through recessions. So it's the ideal. It's the hedge against inflation. It's the resilience through recessional periods, and the tax liabilities. If you want to go into that in more depth, we can, or move on to something else. So where we want to go with this.
I'm Zach Haptonstall, CEO and co-founder of Rise 48 Equity. Our goal is to help you protect and grow your wealth by investing in large multifamily apartment buildings. We do all the work as far as sourcing these large apartment buildings from the brokers, doing all of the on-site management with our vertically integrated property management company, doing all the renovations with our vertically integrated construction company. We completely rebrand the exteriors. We will renovate the interiors to our full platinum level scope, which increases the value of the asset to get that profit margin for the investor. If you'd like to learn about how you can partner with us on these exciting opportunities, and go to our website and set up a call with our team.
You had talked a little bit about inflation, and I'd love to get your perspective on why you feel as though real estate specifically can really help preserve investors' wealth and why it's deemed a hedge against inflation.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that, but just one more comment on risk. It's there. The risk adjustment comes from certainly just the assets themselves, but there is also risk reduction in the fact that we are investing with syndicators who have a really well developed foundation and they know what they're doing. So that in and of itself is a risk reduction, is working with professionals who've been in the game and have shown that they have the ability to withstand recessionary aspects there. So inflation. Uh, I mean, we've seen tremendous inflation over the last 2 years here, unprecedented, really, in recent times for sure. And and how does real estate or how do private placements withstand that? Well, it's with that aspect of appreciation is the primary tool for that. And the average over the last 4 years of appreciation has been 4%, but it has it always keeps pace with inflation because uh, as everything else is inflating, so are rental prices. And so when rent increases, then the value of the properties increase. That gives us more appreciation. And so that's why it's always going to be that hedge against inflation, is because there's just that built-in factor of real estate always keeping up with inflation. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. I mean, we're always going to have inflation. It's always been here for, generations upon generations. And eventually, as the dollar continues to deteriorate, right, and we have inflation of 2 to 10% or somewhere in between, eventually those costs manifest themselves, in the specific elements that make up the property, whether it be single family, multifamily, or somewhere in between, and eventually those costs manifest themselves in the amount of rent that tenants pay to live in those properties. So it makes total sense to me that's why it would be deemed a hedge against inflation. I'd like you now, maybe if you don't mind, Peter, to speak specifically to that investor that has experienced a past financial setback like you did, or maybe that person who's hesitant about transitioning to alternative investments. What advice or first steps would you recommend to build confidence in creating a secure portfolio going forward?
Well, there's a number of things there. One is to look to see where the wealthy are investing, and there is a group. It's called Tiger 21, and it is a network of high net worth individuals. I think to get into the group, you have to have about 20 million in assets. But even though it's a private group, they do share publicly uh, where it is that their members are investing. And they're not putting most of their assets in stocks and bonds. They put over 60% of their investments are going to private placements. A good portion of that is real estate. But in terms of where they're putting stocks and bonds is probably 16, 17 to 18 or 19%. So a fairly insignificant portion of the wealthy are investing in what I think is a very volatile, unpredictable uh, source, which is stocks and bonds. So do what the wealthy do. Also, another thing is that the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco did a 150-year longitudinal study comparing all different asset types. And what they discovered is that private placements, uh, including real estate, were were consistently outperforming, and they were also the most stable and secure of investments. So look to the studies that are out there, look to what the wealthy are doing in order to give yourself confidence to move from what your financial advisor is telling you to do, and come to us. That's what we're here for, is to, because our program is an educational program as well as a mentoring program, and we take students uh, through 6 one-on-one sessions, and we go through the private placement process. So before we even offer you any offerings, we give you a good solid foundation to understand what a private placement is, and give you all of the tools that you need to make a good solid decision on what assets you're going to want to invest in. So those are my suggestions.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I appreciate the kind of the power of education, and obviously that's paramount to anybody deciding to make an investment, is that they should invest in things that they know and understand. What are some, with respect to your students, what are some of the common misconception or fears that your students have about transitioning from just focused on publicly traded investments to recession resistant alternative assets, and how do you address them?
Well, I'll give you just one example. Patrick was very, very successful as an insurance broker. He had his own company, and over the course of his career, he had amassed about pretty close to 200 million in assets. All of that was sitting in the stock market, and Patrick, like so many professionals involved in their careers, their investment portfolios are just kind of a secondary thing. It's not something they've ever focused on. And Patrick was certainly in that situation. Um, and so, making that shift, he first of all had to have a lot of trust, and that's what our program does, is to develop that trust. And the only reason he really made that shift was because he trusted me. But just for example's sake, when we were talking about making the transition from solely stocks and bonds, and he still holds a portion of his portfolio in stocks and bonds. I never tell anybody to just empty that all into real estate, even though that's where all of my investments are. But I don't advise that for everybody. So I asked him. I said, "Well, in 2008, Patrick, what happened to your portfolio in 2008?" And his response was, "Well, I don't really know. I wasn't really paying that much attention to it." And that's typical of a lot of professionals and entrepreneurs who have a lot of assets, and they're sitting in the stock market because that's never been their primary focus.
That's right. Yeah, and I see that all too well, including in my own personal, portfolio. That really, it's out of sight, out of mind. But I don't oftentimes understand, what's moving the needle in those specific investments, because I can't pick up the phone and talk to somebody that actually understands, where the growth is there. This has been a tremendous time. I appreciate the value that you've brought our listening audience. I would like to ask you one softball question, and that is, if somebody listening to this episode today is ready to take control of their financial future but feels overwhelmed, what's one simple yet impactful action that they can take right now?
Well, they can get our exclusive guide to high yield investments, and it's free. And all they have to do is to go to highyieldblueprint.com. So that's www.highyieldblueprint.com. And that's a perfect, wonderful place to start. And so that actually the title of that is our high yield investment blueprint, 60 days to 18% returns. And when they go to the site there, download that, and then they can also set up a free consultation, and we can talk through their concerns and their anxieties, which they certainly are going to have many of those to address and talk about.
That's great. Well, we'll put that link in the show notes for this episode. Dr. Allen, thank you for the tremendous value that you brought us today.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, for allowing me to be on your show. It has truly been a pleasure.
Of course. And listening audience, thank you again for joining another episode of The Freedom Point. We look forward to having you join us on the next episode.
Thank you for hanging out with us today and for listening to the Freedom Point podcast, powered by Starting Point Capital. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing said on this show should be considered financial advice. Before making any financial decision, please consult with a professional. This show is copyrighted by the Freedom Point podcast. Written permissions must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. If you're interested in connecting, you can find contact information at startingpointcapital.com.